And just like that, I have a surplus of small tables. This week's video is a tale of two tables, both done in the same color and two distinctive styles. The drum table was a Merceman. And now before I catch a lot of you-know-what about painting this table, I did some research. Most of the tables that were going for a lot of money had a drawer in them or a rib detail on the side. And this one had a few condition issues, which I didn't even realize until later. But I was impressed that it had the little feet still, the metal feet, which usually doesn't happen. So there was a few staples in here, so I'm just going to use a spray bottle with a TSP cleaner called White Lightning from Dixie Belle, and I am just going to clean this table up. And then I wipe it again using regular water just to rinse the residue from the cleaner. First things first, I decided to do a little design work. I'm trying to design this table, and I'm going to be using some transfers. And the ones that I'll be using are retired from the Bells and Whistles line of Dixie Belle, because they were designed by Brandy Cullenborn of Brush by Brandy, and they're no longer available. So these are kind of unique, so I just want to do something special with them. So I'm just going through right now and seeing what I have, kind of planning out a design, and also to help me select a color. Before I begin painting, I do a little scuff sand just to rough up the surface of the table so that it will accept the paint. And the color that I have chosen is from Silk, and that is an all-in-one mineral paint, meaning that it has a primer and a sealer built into it, and it is in the color Midnight Green. But before I begin painting, as I mentioned, I wasn't really sure 100% what I was doing with the top, but I had a pretty good idea. When I went to lift it, I thought, boy, this is actually in pretty good condition on the top. But that kind of didn't go with my design. So anyway, as I'm working with it, I then realized that there is a few problems that I didn't realize at first. So I wipe back all the dust from the sanding, and I get started painting. So I slow it down a second just to show you the label, that is what I'm using is Midnight Green from Silk. And then on to some speed painting. I love painting legs like this and spindles. It's just fun. I like to put the paint on kind of sideways and then sometimes a little bit up and down, but I always end up painting it side to side. I did not remove the little brass thingies off the feet. I'm going to paint over them. I'm going to come back and highlight them a little bit later. Usually my rule of thumb is that I don't paint where the manufacturer didn't paint originally. But in this case, I paint the underside of those legs because I'm changing the color dramatically so you would see them, I believe. And I want to just make everything green. Isn't this shade gorgeous? Green is such a popular color right now. And I just think it's gorgeous. Midnight Green. So one coat done, time to let that dry. I grab my Ziploc bag, put my brush in because I'm going to be using that color a whole lot more. Time for a second coat. This table and the other one were meant to be a really quick project, really quick flip. And it ended up being just a little bit more involved than I had anticipated. Time to flip it over and paint the top. Because the top is kind of slick, I'm using a product called Slick Stick from Dixie Belle. So I want to make sure the paint is going to adhere, even though I did that little bit of scuff sand. So this is a bonding primer, and it allows my paint to adhere to the slickest of surfaces. While that dries, I turn my attention to the other table, and I start by removing the hardware. And I give this piece a good clean as well, and you can see that it needs it. It's dirty, but it also shows me that if I were going to use a light colored paint on here, I would have some bleed through. So I would want to use a stain blocking primer or shellac or something. But in this case, I'm going to be using a dark color. So I don't think there's any cause for alarm here. And I just continue to clean it with the TSP cleaner and rinse it. I clean it inside and out and clean my drawer as well. I use a little bit of Dixie Belle's Dixie Mud, on the holes that were left from the hardware because I'm going to change the hardware up a little bit. You want to apply this generously but smoothly. It does tend to shrink a little bit, so you want to make sure you put enough on. You can always reapply after you sand a little bit, but I just like to get enough on it. So when I flip the other table, because I'm going back and forth, the leg fell off. So I didn't realize it was loose earlier, so upon inspection, so I guess either it wasn't a good inspection or it was just the right turn. Either way, I'm just glad it happened in the shop and not in a customer's home. So I'm just removing some of the residue from the wood glue that was there previously, and I'm adding some Titebond wood glue into those holes. And I also noticed that there's some more splitting on the leg, so I get everything glued and clamped, and of course then I have to let that dry. So while that is drying, I turn my attention to the tabletop of the other table because I want to bring it back to its original surface. So I begin sanding. I start with a 100 grit paper and I keep moving up. I saw a split on the top of the table and I thought it was maybe veneer where it was seamed, but then I realized it was solid wood and that was just where the pieces were joined together. No problem. I just kept sanding and kept increasing the grit and working with it that way. It just took a long time. It took longer than I anticipated to get this little tabletop back to the original. I just didn't want to go to the trouble of using a stripper, although that might have been a little bit easier from the get-go. Anyone who watches my channel knows that I struggle with this carbide scraper, but this time it was the charm. I used a curved blade and got in all those little detailed areas. I think my problem with it other times is that this scraper is a little bit too small. I need another one that has the big knob or handle on it and a bigger, wider blade so I can get a better grip. So I'm going to do that and I'm going to try again. It's on my Amazon wish list, so that's a perfect opportunity for me to remind you that if you want to support my small business in that way, that there is a link for my Amazon wish list in the description box, along with keep in mind now there's a super thanks button. It's at the bottom right of your screen, and it's just another way to say thank you for the content, and of course I thank you for watching. So after that little commercial break, you'll see that it went pretty easy, and I kept reversing the direction so that I got all the paint out in different ways. And then when I was done using the scraper, then I took sandpaper and I just finished getting the remaining residue from the detail areas. So I was happy I had a successful go with my little carbide scraper today. So let's go back to the drum table. And you know, there's a little bit of brush strokes from the slick stick, so I'm just using sandpaper to knock that down a little bit. I think I'm using a 220 grit. And now I start to paint the tabletop with that glorious midnight green. You'll notice that it's a lot lighter on the top because of the white underneath. So it takes me 4 coats, I believe, to get it to the same shade that we have on the bottom. Back to the little table, I sand the mud that I used to fill the drawers in order to get this ready for painting. And I sand the entire drawer because I'm going to do a little something on the drawer sides as well. On the bottom of this drawer is what's called masonite. I know my dad used to use it a lot. So that it also has flathead screws throughout. So that tells me it is older, but it's not super old. Someone may have replaced the bottom too. It might be older, but they might have replaced the bottom of it, like maybe in the 60s or 70s. Regardless, I'm painting out the entire inside of the drawer with the midnight green. I figured there's only one drawer in this little table, and even though I wanted to do a quick flip, I figure we'll make that a feature. This would make a great little bedside table. So I'm also painting the drawer front. And these are the little details that you should probably pay attention to before you start painting. But I got a little bit on the top, so I'm just wiping that back a little bit. But I decide that I'm going to tape off the sides. Like I said, after I start painting, I decide that's a good idea. So I grab some tape, and then I just tape off so that I can paint the sides without getting green paint all over the side of the drawers. I know I make people crazy sometimes because I do things in weird order, but my brain just, works that way. So I'm also taping off the top of the piece. The reason I'm doing that is because I didn't actually sand down the entire ledge, so it's going to kind of get pieced. So I've seen people do this before, and I always thought it was a little weird myself, but now that I've sanded that much and I didn't realize there was more to that lip, I'm not going back. So I just tape it off, and I think it ends up with a good result. But that way I can go ahead and paint the bottom in the midnight green. Yes, I'm using the same color on both tables, and both tables have a totally different attitude, we'll call it, different style. I did forget to do a scuff sand on here, so I'm just showing you a close-up of what the paint looks like, but it does get a scuff sand before the second coat, and that's okay. Sometimes you forget, but yeah, I did, and just I want to make sure the paint adheres, so I did come back in and give it a sand before the second coat. So while that one is drying, I go back to my little table. All the coats are dry, and I'm just cutting apart these transfers because I'm going to be layering them. I want the center to be kind of a bouquet that just kind of keeps going, a nice round arrangement. So I choose a piece for the center that has a few flowers, and then I distribute the other flowers that I cut all around, and little cuttings with leaves. So I just kind of layer everything and then just flip it one at a time. And I am using, this is a tool from Redesign with Prima. It's a transfer tool, so I got that a long time ago, and it's a very handy thing. But you can use, usually they come with a little stick that you can use to transfer. So whatever you use, just want to make sure. My biggest tip for using transfers is whatever you do, make sure that your paint is completely dry. well dry before you start doing this. Otherwise, you will pull up the paint when you pull up the transfers. If you watch my Tuesday talk sometimes, you know, because we're only working in an hour, I try to use a dryer or a hair dryer or a heat gun and dry my projects and then apply a transfer. I usually end up pulling up the transfer because it just isn't enough time for that paint to dry. Especially silk, it dries from the top down. So once you start pressing on it, that just creates a problem. So yeah, make sure your paint is good and dry. So it's looking good. I really like it. The only thing I have to say is the transfer seemed really sheer. And, you know, it might have looked better if I had painted a lighter color underneath it. But, because you can kind of see the green through it. You can also see some lines in it. So I'm not thrilled. There's a couple things that I can do. The first thing I do is take this Abralon pad, which is a really very fine grit pad, and they use it for polishing bowling balls. And I'm just going over this surface just to get rid of the halos and just to see what happens when I do this. Because I'm also considering distressing the transfer, which is what I'm doing now. I'm using sandpaper. I'm using like a 220 grit sandpaper, and this helps get rid of the little halos that you see around the transfers. It's especially noticeable on this dark paint. So I am working with it to do that. And you want to be gentle when you do this because you don't want to actually put holes in your transfer. And if you do, roll with it. Continue to put a few more in and really go with the distress look then. I decide to take some of the paint, the midnight green that's on my brush, and just kind of wiggle it around the transfer. I want to give some depth to this and a little bit of shadow, because I think I'm just going to approach it in that way. So there were just some areas that after I sanded, I felt like you could still see some of the lighter or the slick stick and the brush strokes underneath. So I'm just working my way around the transfer and just kind of evening out that green color. While that dries, I look at another transfer, and this one is still being sold, and this is by Kristana of Bella Renovare. She's no longer a brand ambassador with Dixie Belle either, but her transfer is still being sold and still available. This one is called Retro Patterns, and I'm just cutting the borders off the side, and I'm just adding a little punch to the drawer sides, just something for a little bit of interest. You would think this would be straightforward and simple, and it was, but I guess I was rushing a little bit, and I kind of screwed it up a little bit and had to go back and fix up my mess up, but that's okay. It all ended up being all right in the end. my advice, it didn't take long, but take your time. I really messed up that side trying to fix a little boo-boo, so I go to the other side and work on that, and I'll return to the other side and decide what I'm doing there. I do make a little mistake on this one, but it's towards the back of the drawer, which you won't see in normal use with the drawer. So I end up patching the other side, and it all works out just fine. If you do have to patch, in this case, because it's a geometric design, I do make sure that I match up the pattern so that it doesn't look like it's patched. And I did manage to do a decent job of that. So I held it up and then just trimmed it off and applied the transfer. And I don't think anyone will be the wiser, except, of course, you guys. Now I'm just lightly sanding the edges just to make sure that they are smooth. I take a little bit of sandpaper and rub the tops of the drawer sides because I had gotten some of the paint on there. I wiped it off before, but this paint is highly pigmented, so on the raw wood, I just wanted to make sure I got rid of that, so I just did a little sanding. And here I am measuring. I'm using a handle that was left over from another project, but I got these handles on Amazon, and I can put the link in the description box. But it's just a nice gold handle that you grab underneath, and I'm centering it, just putting one in the center. So I do a little bit of my math and drop it once. So this is my process for measuring. I measured and marked both half, but then when I put it on, it just didn't look right. So I centered the handle and just kept measuring from either side. Fortunately, I only had one handle to do, and it was a small project, so... Time to stain the top. I remove the tape. I'm using Voodoo Gel Stain in Au Naturel, and I'm just kind of squirting the stain on, and I'm using a foam brush. These are foam and dandy brushes from Dixie Belle. They're pretty good quality for foam brushes. I've used this one and washed it probably a half dozen times now, so it's standing up pretty well. They're only a couple dollars, so it's a good value. I wipe the stain back after I do small sections at a time. I just put it on the brush a little bit for the sides to get in that little groove. In goes the drawer, and I will apply a coat of Dixie Belle's satin sealer on the top, and this piece is pretty much done. So let's go back to the drum table, and now I'm using some glaze. I'm using black glaze from Dixie Belle. Just opening a new jar here. And I'm using an artist brush and just doing a shadow around all of the flowers. I use a pretty generous amount of glaze. If you've ever used glaze, it's sort of like a little bit thicker paint. It has sort of almost a gel consistency. But I put a little bit on, and then I'm just kind of dabbing it in, as I don't want to wipe it back and absolutely get rid of it. I really want it to be concentrated around those flowers. And I work my whole way around. And then when I'm done, I go in on top of the flowers and do some, add some more shadow. Because I really, again, want to get rid of those areas where you can see an overlap on the transfer and any marks from underneath. So I'll just use the artist brush in this way and just give it a very distressed, not so much distressed, but just depth, more of a painting type feel to it. So here I'm going in and putting a little depth around the individual flowers. And then I did the whole way around the edge of the table. As a final touch, I carry the glaze on through the details on the piece. All those little curves and everything on the legs, and also the feet. And I just go along and do a little brushing and then wipe it back. And it's nothing heavy or intense. It's just a little bit of detail that kind of makes the whole piece cohesive. So it's not a heavily distressed look. It's just a little design detail. Finally, gold gilding wax brings the luster and the detail back to those little feet. Here you see both tables, and I'm looking at the surface of the floral table, the drum table, and I see there's what looks like little tiny bubbles. So I'm taking the head of a pin, or the point of a pin, and just putting a little hole in them and then rubbing over it, and that seems to take care of the problem and makes them disappear. So I don't know whether the transfer didn't like me adding anything on top of it so soon after I had done it, or whether they weren't completely burnished. Not sure, but anyway, that's the scoop on that. I bring back that Abralon pad with the superfine grit just to burnish it. A few more holes, just rub it over everything. So I decided to put one more coat of black glaze over the entire piece. I figure it will deepen the places where I already used the detail brush and just increase the drama. Sorry about the glare on there. I didn't realize it when I was filming. And I lightly wipe it back with a paper towel. Here I take some Big Mama's butter in the unscented, and I just use it on the drawer on the bottom and inside the cavity where it goes, just to make everything glide a little more smoothly. Here I'm using Dixie Belle's Satin Clear Coat. It increases the resistance to moisture because people will probably set drinks on a bedside table. Hopefully they'll use a coaster, but that's in the ideal world. And you can use as many coats as you like. Each coat is going to increase its durability. Dixie Belle's reformulating the gator hide, but they say that 3 coats of Satin Clear Coat is equal to a coat of gator hide. So remember what these guys looked like before we did our makeover? And here's how they look now. Thank you so much for watching today. If you like this video, how about giving it a thumbs up and also share it with your friends? If you haven't subscribed, you'll want to do that so you don't miss anything. Visit us at LiVintageDecor.company, and on Instagram we're LiVintageDecor, and on Facebook we're LiVintageDecor Altoona. Stay well.